We're here at early polling at the seat of Corio, the federal seat of Corio, currently held by the deputy leader of the Labor Party, Richard Marles. And standing against Richard Marles in this election is Shane Murdock, standing for the United Australia Party. Welcome, Shane.
Good morning, how are you?
Tell me a little bit about your background. What got you into politics, and in particular, what made you decide to stand for election in the seat of Corio?
Well, I should say, first of all, I'm a very reluctant politician, but I have a compulsion to be in this race. I'm a commercial pilot for 42 years, captain since 1992. I have commercial licences in every mode of transport, a master's degree. I'm a qualified air accident investigator, and I'm actually a qualified African safari guide and tracker as well. I got into this because 2.5 months ago I was terminated because of a vaccine mandate. Ironically, I was fired for the very same reasons I was hired. I use a skill set surrounded around risk aversion, problem solving and critical thinking. When I applied that to an experimental mandated vaccine, I was shown the door.
Okay, so that probably would resonate with a lot of voters. We've seen an increase in unemployment, the lack of employers to fill vacant positions. It's my understanding, based on community polling, that a lot of that is to do with reluctant vaccine recipients or people reluctant to undertake the vaccine regime.
That's correct.
Is that your understanding also?
That's my understanding too.
All right, so I just want to have a chat to you a little bit about the policies of the United Australia Party.
Yep.
So perhaps if I just raise them individually with you, and if you could just elaborate as much as you can. One of the key policy points of the United Australia Party is to forgive the HECS debts.
Yes.
So is that correct, that you want to forgive all current HECS debts?
Correct.
And what about, would the HECS program be ceased entirely?
That's my understanding that would be the case, that university education moving forward would be a free education.
Okay, and one of the ones, this is probably very topical at the moment with the Reserve Bank increasing interest rates, is a cap on mortgages at 3%. How does the United Australia Party plan to cap mortgages at 3% or below?
Okay, Section 51 of the Commonwealth Constitution allows us to do that. In fact, I think it was 1992 that the government of the day gave full rights to set interest rates by the Reserve Bank. That can be reversed. Now, the policy is for existing mortgages. So the money that the banks have lent was borrowed by them at a much lower rate. So materialistically, it's not going to affect their profit margin, but it's certainly going to help people with mortgages and the cost of living rising and the interest rates going up as well.
All right, Shane, and one of the other key policy platforms that Clive Palmer's been very vocal about is the repaying of the national debt using Australia's rich
Well, that
natural
underpins
resources.
everything. 15% levy on iron ore exports will service a $1.3 trillion debt the nation's currently in. What that means in real terms, that every man, woman and child essentially owes $40,000 each. By having that levy placed on iron ore exports, that debt will be serviced and paid off within 20 years, and that means our tax, your tax, can go to things like forgiving HECS debts, increasing the old age pension by $180 a fortnight.
One would argue that that could have an impact with our trading partners. One of our biggest trading partners and biggest consumer of iron ore product would be China. So effectively, the United Australia Party's policy, if I'm correct, is that China will repay our national debt, considering China is the country that is making the money out of our resources.
That's correct. 80% of China's iron ore comes from Australia. There's only two other sources they have in the world, that's South Africa and South America, neither of which have the infrastructure to deliver the capacity of iron ore that China currently needs.
Okay, and bringing Australian super investments home, can you elaborate what that actually means?
There's currently $3.4 trillion of Australian superannuation invested overseas. The Australians are ranked third in the world for super investment. What we're saying is 1/3 of that we should bring home and invest in infrastructure, manufacturing and industry in Australia. It doesn't mean they'll get less money returned, it just means we would like that $1 trillion invested into our own economy.
Okay, and zonal taxation in rural communities, can you explain how that works?
That's a decentralisation program, essentially, is to create industry and help industry thrive in rural areas and make it more attractive for people to move to rural areas. That also will relieve congestion on the roads and public transport in the cities.
Okay, and obviously the cost of living is a massive issue at the moment.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you're aware or not, but the leader of the Labor Party, Anthony Albanese, came out yesterday and announced that he would be supportive of a 5.1% increase in the living wage, or in wages in general. I see that you've got an increase here of $180 a fortnight for pensioners as part of your policy. How would that be paid for?
That's paid for because it's underpinned by the levy on the resources going overseas. That means that our income taxes used currently to service that debt will be redirected into things like the old age pension.
Okay, and just finally, Restoring Freedoms is one of the key policy platforms. We see the words "Vote for Freedom" on all the placards for the United Australia Party. Victorians in particular suffered the world's longest and harshest lockdowns during the pandemic. Those lockdown legislation laws are still in place by Daniel Andrews, the Labor state Premier. Can I just ask, what do you mean by restore freedoms, and how can the United Australia Party restore freedoms?
Well, this is something that's very much to my heart. Obviously, I said earlier that I was terminated from my job 2.5 months ago. Now, people need the freedom to work, they need freedom of choice in regard to what medical procedures they undertake. They need freedom to move. You're right, Victoria had massive lockdowns, and the proportionality of the response to this whole pandemic has been so out of whack. All it's done is actually put people out of work, marginalised people, and introduced what could be termed a medical apartheid.
Now, we were speaking earlier, you found it incredibly difficult to cut through with mainstream media, messages getting lost in the fog. In some cases, media outlets just point blank refusing to run any messaging or conduct interviews with you. So that's the purpose of this interview today, is to allow you to upload this video and to have it shared amongst community members. Can I just ask, in general, campaigning, how have you found it since the polls opened at the beginning of the week?
Since the election was announced, and since polling's actually started, it's been quite refreshing to see people are ready for a change. People have had enough, as we all have. But there is an element within our society that haven't been affected. I've had a saying right from the beginning of this: if you're not affected, you're not affected. And sadly, we still see quite a bit of that. But people that I come in contact with have been affected in so many ways. Poverty amongst in our community right now is terrible. People living in cars that, until 18 months ago, had a full-time job, family home, kids in school. It's terrible, and they're being forgotten, and I'm here to fight for them.
No worries. Thanks for your time today, Shane.
Thank you very much.